Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our Diversity Council presentation this evening featuring Wes Love of Culture Stoke. The Diversity Council of Atascadero's mission is to help empower our business community to celebrate diversity through education and kindness. We are a diverse group of individuals from a variety of backgrounds whom seek to build relationships with professionals in the area of diversity, education, equity, and inclusion to ultimately present this information as a resource to the members of the Chamber of Commerce. We do thank you for joining us this evening. This session will be recorded for future viewing. And with that, I will turn it over to my co-chair, Victoria, to make introductions. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. So as Charles said, we are the Diversity Council with the Atascadero Chamber, and I will start off a little bit by just saying that we really were intrigued by what Culture Stoke had to offer, mostly because, well, their intention is to grow a great company culture while increasing profitability. And so the idea of really going beyond the bottom line is really what intrigued us the most. And so I'll read a little bit of our workshop details for today to just bring you all into why we're here and introduce our speaker. And so our workshop today will dive into the problems most organizations face when they're thinking about diversity and inclusivity, how inclusivity or the lack thereof impacts your culture and your bottom line, and why inclusivity should be at the top of your organization's strategic imperatives. So attendees will walk away with not only the business case for inclusivity, but equipped with the awareness of how it can show up and a couple of simple ways to increase the morale and profit. So we have our speaker representing Culture Stoke. His name is Wes Love. And I'd like to ask him to share a little bit about how he got into this work and what he's currently up to in his work and home life.
Well, thanks, Charles, and thanks, Victoria. Appreciate you all having me tonight. Wow, where to start? I always tell people that I lived my life a little bit backwards. I got married very young. My wife and I are going to celebrate our 17-year anniversary this Saturday, so very excited about that. But then we had kids very young, and then I found a career, and then I went to school. And it was because it wasn't until a little bit later in life that I found passion for this idea of building workplaces where people not only are feel valued, but are actually stoked to go to work. And I think that inclusivity plays a really massive part in that. But it's something that I find that a lot of organizations don't put together as as working together. So one of the things that Marty, my business partner, and I really try to illuminate is this idea of culture. But inclusivity plays a massive piece in that, which hopefully after today, you will get a little bit more of an understanding of how that's going to show up in the workplace and what the impacts of that actually are. So the humanity side or the humanistic side of inclusivity, notwithstanding, there really is a business case in workplaces for this sort of thing. So hopefully through today, you'll walk away with a couple of ways that you can at least have a level of awareness and maybe some desire to affect change, because it's something that it's going to take all of us, but it starts with each of us. And so that's really the crux of it. I'm just really enthused about any group that is taking on this challenge, because I think it's something that we're at a pivotal point in our country's history, and these are going to be the legacies that we leave behind, because really at the end of the day, I'm doing this for my kids so that they don't have to go to work how I used to go to work, which was looking for a place that paid me the most and just trying to make it through and get that paycheck, which is just not a workplace I want my kids to be a part of. So with that, are we cool to get started, or are there other housekeeping things before we go?
Just around, I guess, the whole questions and muting, unmuting. I mean, the flavor of this presentation, can you just give us a little tidbit of how you'd like that to go, Wes?
So I'm a huge proponent of dialogue, not monologue. So if you have questions and you feel comfortable, you can feel free to come off mute. The raise your hand feature I find to be really helpful if I'm like right in the middle of a thought or idea. It can help me to kind of clue you in. So if you don't know where that is, it's under your reactions button down there at the bottom. There's a feature that'll raise your hand, and essentially what it'll do, it'll tell me, hey, Victoria raised their hand, something like that. You can also use the chat feature, which I can monitor pretty well. But I'll engage with questions, and if you feel comfortable and you're not worried about being recorded asking questions, I'm all for that as well, because I think that just enhances the overall learning experience. So I'm completely open to that if that sounds cool. All right. Well, then why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint, because what's a presentation without PowerPoint? Am I right? So with that, we're going to talk about what inclusivity does and how it shows up, and not only how it can improve your life, but also your bottom line, because there is an ROI to inclusivity. Okay, so hopefully you walk away with a little bit of that. Wanted to establish a couple of norms. First and foremost, this is a safe place. I believe that we are only as good as how honest we can be with ourselves, and that means being able to ask questions about things that we don't understand, because what we find is that biases are really learning opportunities. Biases are things that are taught off of invalid information. And so finding what those things are requires self-reflection and inquiry. So please understand that this is a safe place. And a quote I like to use, which is a little not exactly true, because we're recording this to be watched, but what is said here stays here, but what's learned here leaves here, I think is just a good mode to go into, where I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to take what I'm learning about this and I'm going to go affect some change in folks' lives. The second norm I'd like to get established is owning your own learning. So that means being comfortably vulnerable. I don't want to put you in the alert stage and and have you have to jump off the Zoom call because you're going into a panic attack. But hopefully what I can do a little bit is stretch you and put us into that stretch zone a little bit, because that's where we really learn as people. Open and honest dialogue is really important when it comes to learning in general, but in particular when it comes to matters of inclusivity and diversity. And last but certainly not least is I love to have a little fun. I think life is so serious and so short in and of itself that if we don't infuse a little bit of fun with it, then what are we doing? So can I get just a thumbs up that we're cool with those norms? Nice.
Yes.
Like it. All right. Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that.
Sorry.
Cool. No, you're all good. All right. So just a little bit about myself. I was raised in the Central Coast of California. I grew up, was a graduate of Arroyo Grande High School, class of 2001. Go Eagles. And got married to my preschool sweetheart. Not really preschool sweetheart. We actually went to preschool together, but didn't know that until many, many, many years later. But got married to the love of my life, and we moved to Bakersfield, where I lived for 10 years of my life. And in that time, I went from leaving high school with the mentality that I would rather work twice as hard and make less money than ever step foot into school again, to moving back to the Central Coast with a master's degree, working at Cal Poly and teaching part-time at Cal Poly as well. And I partnered with an old high school friend, and we've started Culture Stoke, where we are just really trying to make the Central Coast a place where people want to live, not just because of the weather, but because there's awesome places to work. So that's really what drives us to do what we do, and what drives me to do what I do. So what you're going to learn today is why culture is fundamental to your inclusivity and diversity, how diversity is misunderstood, because I have a fervent belief that it is, or misunderstood, or at least minimized. Okay, and so we'll dive into a little bit about that, and what you can do to build an inclusive and diverse organization and community, right? This is one of the things that really drive us. We want to create workplaces where people are better neighbors, where they're better spouses, where they're better parents, because they work at awesome places. And that is tied specifically to inclusivity, okay? So I want to start off with a question. What does culture have to do with inclusion and diversity? Why am I bringing up culture in an inclusivity and diversity talk? Does anyone have any thoughts? Remember, this is a safe space. Go ahead, Penny. I think you're on mute, though.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, if there isn't a culture of that, then it can be felt. And it really keeps, I think, your ability as a company to attract and maintain others of different cultures from wanting to even be in your workforce. So you would want to have a culture or a feeling of inclusion and diversity. It's just much like the women's, the women's movement, as far as, how women are viewed in the workforce. And if it's not a positive culture, then it's not healthy. And, you don't want to be there.
Yeah, that is an awesome, succinct way to put that, Penny. I appreciate you for being the brave one to break the microphone ice, as it were. So I appreciate you on that. And then Charles put in here, because our unique experiences help to enrich organizations and find out what we have in common and connections and what differences we have and what opportunities there are. Yeah, those are wonderful ways to put this, right? So organizations tend to struggle with this idea of culture because we talk about it in very esoteric terms. It seems very nebulous, right? It's not tangible. So one of the models that we've developed at Culture Stoke is to really bring down culture to a tangible, or at least an observable level, and how that shows up in the workplace. And what we find is it shows up in these 4 different areas, right? The first area is how we treat each other. So that's internal to our organizations. How do we treat one another, people that are within our tribe, so to speak, right? How do we treat those externally? So the people that are outside, these can be our community members, these can be our customers, these can be our competitors, these can be our suppliers, contractors, etc. How we view and solve problems as an organization, and how we communicate. And so the reason that I would like to bring up culture when it comes to these things is what we have to understand is that when you distill culture down to its base level, it's a gross oversimplification, but it's the one that I find to be most impactful and most effectual, is culture is about behavior. And specifically, your culture determines what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And so you can see and you can draw this correlation of how we treat each other. If, like Penny was alluding to, if you don't have inclusivity built into your culture, then the problem is you're going to have culture whether you try it or not, whether you try to build it, whether you're intentional or not, it's going to be there. And so it behooves us as leaders and organizations to build inclusivity and diversity as an intentional part of our organizational culture, not only because it's the right human thing to do, but as hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand, there's also a bunch of business benefits that come with that, okay? So I just like to start that with like understanding when I start to mention culture, those things there is a direct connection between those two things. But I definitely want to get clear on this idea of inclusivity and diversity, because we tend to use those terms synonymously, and those are actually 2 different things. And so I want to start off with, can somebody give me a definition of diversity? When you hear the term, doesn't have to be what Merriam-Webster says, like when you hear the term diversity, what do you think? Go ahead, Whitney.
A variety.
A variety, yeah. I mean, it is as simple as that. Okay, when you think about an organization, how many things are in your cornucopia, right? When you look around, what is the variety? That's diversity, okay? And so when we think about this idea of diversity, when we're speaking of that specifically, it's only talking specifically about the different distinctions or the different characterizations that you have, or in some cases don't have, in your workplace or your community. Okay. What about this idea of inclusivity? When we think about the inclusivity, what is that? Go ahead, Christina.
To make sure to involve everyone, include everybody, no matter their background or who they are.
Right. That's the behavior. Okay, so inclusivity, inclusion is the behavior, right? A definition that I use regularly for a behavior is an observable act. Okay, it's something that you can videotape. And so when we think about this distinction between inclusion and diversity, it really becomes a matter of focus. Where should we be focusing our efforts and energy? And where can it become problematic? There's a old saying in the organizational development world that you can hire yourself into diversity. You cannot hire yourself into inclusion. And so one of the key takeaways that I hope you grasp from this is that an organization should look at your diversity numbers as a lagging indicator of your inclusivity, your level of inclusivity, okay? So when you look at, because here's the thing, if you spend time, effort, energy, leadership in building a really inclusive culture, what do you think a result of that effort is going to be? Go ahead, Charles. I see you talking. Come on.
So I guess what you're getting at is that if you spend the time to build an inclusive culture, then it will be reflected in the variety or diversity of its population. So,
yeah. If you build a place that is inclusive by nature, first and foremost, the people that get you your hires are the folks that work for you. Okay. And so if they know that it is a strategic part of this company to be inclusive, they're going to tell their diverse friends, you should come work here. Okay. And so what I have found to be problematic in many organizations' approaches to this, I&D effort or diversity and inclusion effort is they focus on the diversity. They're like, we got to go and we got to go out and we got to hire these people. But here's the problem. If you only focus on diversity, okay, but you don't fix your inclusivity issues, which is probably why you're not diverse in the first place, you're going to hire a bunch of people that are going to come in and go, this place kind of sucks, right? Like that. And so it really becomes a level of focus that organizations should focus on this idea of inclusion. So hopefully as we go through the day, I can give you a little bit more of like an understanding of when we say inclusivity, what does that mean? But I do want to dive in a little bit about the dimensions of diversity. And so I like to use Loden's model. I'm a big proponent. All models are flawed. Some models are useful. I find this one to be particularly useful when it talks about expanding the view of what diversity is, okay, and what that actually means and how that can be represented in the workplace. So when I unveil this kind of internal dimensions, you see these things. What's the first thing that comes to mind? What word, image, like what phrase, kind of what jumps out to you when you see this inner circle? Let me think.
Like just the individual themselves, just a person?
Yeah. Okay. So it's very individualized. Okay. So age jumped out to Brenda, that age is on there. Okay. What are, like, from a high level, when you look at this, what jumps out at you? Go ahead, Whitney.
Intersectionality.
Okay. So say more. Intersectionality and say more.
A lot of those different subjects intertwine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Some of the other things that I get from this is that this is usually where folks' minds go when the term diversity gets brought up. Okay. And what I mean by that is there are actual, go ahead, Victoria.
Oh, I noticed, and I don't know if it was intentional, but age and physical ability are larger than the other quadrants.
Yeah. I don't know if I wasn't here when they built the model, but I'm assuming that is just because that's how they could get it to fit. But I don't think I think because of this internal dimensions, I don't know if there's any significance, but that kudos to you, because I've used this model for many years and you're the first person to bring that up. And now that you said it, I'm like, wow, that does stick out like a sore thumb, doesn't it? So good on you for bringing it up. So some of the other things that I've heard about this, right, is that these are the things that for the most part you can see, okay, that are just kind of readily apparent. But the reason I like to bring up this first one is that this is usually where folks put their when they think about diversity, this is what they think about. Okay, there's actually words for these in our human resources world. These are what are known as the protected classes. You can't discriminate or hire or fire based on these things. There's laws that are put in place for this. And so this is where, in the rest of this conversation is going to kind of seem like I'm not minimizing these, because I want to make sure that I am empathetic to the fact that while we have made some strides in these areas, there is still a ton of work to do. But for the context of this discussion, I want to broaden the horizons of different distinctions that we draw in the workplace that can be problematic when it comes to your employee and your level of inclusivity, okay? So just rest assured that I understand, like, these are very important. There's a lot of very important work happening in these areas, but there can be some more subtle and some more nuanced ways in which we draw distinctions in the workplace that these can become problematic. Go ahead, Christina.
I had a question on that. So would physical disabilities fall into that category, or is that somewhere else down the line?
Yeah, that goes under the physical ability or disability. So it's whether so yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's the whole ADA thing. Howard, go ahead. See your hand up.
Yeah, these are all static.
Mm-hmm.
They don't change, maybe with the exception of sexual orientation.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I wish my age would stop changing, to be totally honest. But yeah, like they're typically the things that we don't have a ton of control over. If that, that might be another way of putting that, right? Like, this is who I am. This is kind of my DNA and my brain. This is me, okay? This next dimension, just because I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to all things, is this external dimension, right? And so these are distinctions that actually show up in the workplace that we have, and you'll hear me use the term distinction or label, okay? I'm using those kind of interchangeably, but these are things that, just to kind of draw it down to like a very distilled level, these are things that we judge people based on, okay? These are all things that we will feel or think or act or behave a certain way based on these things, right? All of these things, okay? So diversity is not just those internal dimensions. Those are fundamentally important, but we still draw distinctions in the workplace based on these other things. I have had coworkers come up and tell me that, they're not married and they are treated differently than their married friends, right? They're not invited to certain things, right? I have friends that are, have chosen to not have children, and people think and act and behave a certain type of way about that because it's like, oh, you didn't have kids, right? Those are all still aspects of diversity in the workplace. There's still distinctions that we draw on folks in the workplace. Some of them are ineffectual. They're not really going to matter in the end game, but some of them can actually be pretty damaging, okay? Particularly when it comes to hiring and recruiting. Educational background, I have worked with organizations that give preference to certain colleges. You could have the same degree, okay, but because you went to this school and not this school, I'm going to give preference to this, right? Because those distinctions can be positive as well as negative, okay? The last is what they just added this to the model recently. It's the organizational level, the organizational dimension. And this is where we start to draw distinctions based on people at work, like what they do. Are they part of the union? Are they staff? Are they faculty? Are they in leadership positions? Do they work out in the field? Do they have a jumpsuit? We draw distinctions based on all of these things. So I wanted to use this as a mechanism to expand the view of diversity. When we're talking about these things, it's not just that internal dimension. Those are still very important, but we still draw distinctions about folks in all of these dimensions that can have implications in the workplace, right? So what are you talking about, Wes? Okay, I get it. But what does this have to do with our talk today? I fervently believe that real inclusivity starts with getting to know people at this level, the personality level, okay, and who they are, understanding what their life is all about, understanding, you know, what the gifts they bring, the challenges that they bring. And so let's move into what inclusivity is, right? So what does it take to have an inclusive organization? And you can look at these bubbles on the screen and you can think of those as kind of your stepping stone or your yellow brick road, or, you know, whatever metaphor works for you, to getting to this idea of like, how do I know I have an inclusive organization? So first and foremost, an individual in your organization needs to feel safe, physically, mentally, emotionally, in some cases, spiritually. Okay, we're talking Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom foundation. People need to feel safe at work. Okay. If you have that, you can move into this next idea of accepted, right? Which is seen as one of the group. Okay, yes, you work here, you draw a paycheck from here, you are seen as one of the group. And the last bubble is appreciated, valued for their contributions. So I know you might be asking yourself, well, accepted and appreciated, like what's the distinction there? What's the line there? Does anyone have any thoughts about the difference between accepted versus appreciated?
Well, Wes, I think, you know, accepting is I can accept the fact that you work here and you draw a paycheck, but, you know, appreciating one, or as, you know, you put here, you're valued for your contributions. I think it can be very evident in conversation that you're having with someone, whether or not you appreciate their input or not, and whether or not it's received. So, you know, while that may not shed a lot of light on it, you can feel it.
Totally. Yeah. I love that you brought the fact that it's a feeling, right? This is one of the things where that I am like, just, it drives me nuts about workplaces, right? Where we talk about, you hear things like, leave your feelings at the door. This is a place of business, right? That's not inclusive. Okay. We are emotional creatures, and to deny the fact that humans have emotions in the workplace is not only not inclusive, but really, if you really look at it, it's emotional abuse. Okay, it's repression of emotion, which is, any armchair psychologist will tell you, when you repress emotions, nothing good happens, right? So back to this model of accepted and appreciated. I love metaphors. I'm a big metaphor person. So the best distinction that I can draw here. How many of you have younger siblings or were the younger sibling? Just quick show of hands. Have siblings, were the younger sibling. Okay, I'm gonna paint a picture for you, and I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar from either side, whether you were the younger sibling or you were the older sibling. Okay. Older sibling has a bunch of friends over, and younger sibling wants to tag along and play, right? Older sibling says, nah, these are my friends. You take your toys and you go over there, right? And then the younger sibling runs off to parents and says, hey, they're not letting me be a part of it. And then parent pulls older sibling aside and says, hey, you need to let your little sibling come and play with you. Okay. And you're like, oh, fine. And then you bring them over here. But look, this may have just been me and the several other people who have been through a workshop very similar with me that have corroborated this story. But there's a little pep talk involved before you let your sibling come in, right? Like, these are my friends. Okay, you don't speak. You speak when you're spoken to. Okay, you do not get to play on the games. All you can do is sit there, and you just kind of sit here on the couch. Okay, accepted, seen as one of the group. Okay, yeah, you're part of this group. Valued for their contributions. Okay. The feeling is no different when we're talking about in the workplace. Okay, because that feeling of exclusion is the same. Here is a group of people that I want to be a part of that are only begrudgingly allowing me to be here. Okay, and so while it may be a little more concentrated because it's family, I have a fervent belief that there are very few differences between the relationship between employee and employer and any other personal relationship you have. The content of those relationships might be different. The outcomes, the expectations might be different, but contextually they're the same. Trust, communication, reciprocation, right? Value, appreciation. So when we talk about inclusion, it's not simply enough to just accept people. We have to appreciate them and celebrate them. This is why things like saying I'm colorblind is not okay, because that is not appreciating and accepting and valuing people for being different. Okay. Inclusivity is not about finding the things that unite us. Okay. That's just humanity. Okay. Inclusion is about celebrating the fact that not only community speaking, but at our organizations, we're better because we're different, because we have different and varying degrees of experience, because we have differences of thoughts, because we have different life experiences, because we didn't grow up in the same cities, on the same towns, or the same streets. We didn't go to the same schools. That diversity of thought actually makes us better than places that don't have that. So that's the competitive advantage of inclusivity. Go ahead, Penny.
I can't help, but I'm kind of stuck. You kind of stuck me on the emotional abuse, about keeping your feelings at the door, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And going even further back a little bit, I think appreciation is also spoken, not just implied, not just shown, but told and shown. Give them a little cash, tell them how much you appreciate. I think verbally, embracing your employees as much as possible in a positive sense is very important. And that's just something I've learned over the years. People want to hear it. They really don't want any more than just to be told that they're appreciated. And the emotional abuse, I can only think about how that pertains to us as a business where we have customer service. I can't afford you to come in and bring the argument that you had with your mother to my counter and then take it out on all the customers. You do have to leave. There has to be a balance, and you do have to leave some of that and put on another game face and pull up your pants and get to work. And that's kind of how you have to do it. But then again, that's where we come in as employers to say, hey, look, I know you had a bad day, but I appreciate how you got through it, and I appreciate you not, giving the customers too hard of a time, that kind of thing. But so I had a little, with the abuse, because I'm not going to let you come in my place. If you're in a bad mood, you better go back to your car and figure it out before you come in here and start working.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And just know that everything in life, there is a balance of things. But when I say that it's abuse, what I'm talking about is your prototypical, the typical conversation of like somebody's having a bad day and you're telling them you shouldn't be feeling that way, right? We tend to console people like you have a job, like you got a job, you know what I mean? Like we try to make them feel better. So it's a concept that I'm learning, and we're learning together as kind of a family unit. It's like there's a difference between feeling your feelings and how we respond to those. And so I think the important point that you hit on, Penny, was as leaders, it's your job to have your antenna up and go, hey, something seems off about this person. Let me go check in with them. Hey, everything cool? Do you what can I do for you? Because obviously I can't have you in here taking out your the frustrations on customers, right? That's not, because that goes back to that culture thing of how we treat those externally, right? But are there opportunities for maybe them to go, swap with somebody to go in the back and do inventory, right? Are there opportunities for them to do things that maybe are not customer facing, right? Those are the types of things that when I say that you're telling people to not feel things, what I mean is your first inclination is to not care about the individual. I only care about you doing your job. If that's the case, cool, that's a decision that you make, but understand how that's going to impact your person's ability to feel safe mentally, spirit, or physically and emotionally. There is a bit of acknowledging that people have feelings, whereas back at, when I first started working, it was very much like, no, you leave those at the door like a briefcase. I can just, like hop in, and as soon as I walk in, I can pick those things back up. Like, that's just not how human beings work, right? But really I think the balance comes in of, is there an opportunity for me to just check in with them, to let them know that I'm here for them if they want to talk? If they need to go out to their car for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, that's much better than trying to force them to do the work. You know what I mean? Like, giving them that space to process and to prepare themselves, because people want to come to work and do a good job, right? And we all have extenuating circumstances where we haven't been our best selves when we showed up to work. But really, when we talk about this idea of inclusivity, that comes with it, right? People's emotions are part of that, and understanding that there are certain people that are able to kind of use their emotions like a light switch, and they can come in and they can put their head down, plaster the smile on their face and be cool. But some other folks are not able to do that. And so it's working with them in balance and keeping it realistic, that like, hey, you do have a job to do. So if you can't pull it together, maybe you take a sick day, right? Maybe you just call it for today, because we still have business needs. And it's the leadership aspect of that is finding the balance, right? Victoria.
Yeah, I guess I'm just really thinking about a lot the differences between diversity and inclusion. And I think about like the litmus test for me that separates the two is, I don't think you can have inclusivity truly and tokenize your group, but I think you can have diversity and completely tokenize your group. And so I guess that's been something I've been seeing a lot lately, as it's been sort of a little phase in the workplace. I think this whole diversity, inclusion, DEI and stuff. And I guess I just wanted to name that, where you see pictures of people that look diverse and it's not necessarily representative what's going on in their culture. So yeah, just thinking a lot about that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and so this is where like affirmative action is become problematic, right? Because it has given birth to some of these, like, this is where you get those terrible like, oh, affirmative action hire, or, the term pink seat is usually is like, oh, well, we save one seat on our board to make sure we at least have one female in our workplace. Like, yeah, it becomes this thing that it's like a flavor of the month thing, when no, really, again, not even from like the humanistic side of things notwithstanding, because I think it's important for as a society for us to address these things. But in the workplace, people feel that. Okay, I have clients who have actually had prospective employees that they loved and they wanted to be a part of it, turn down the job because they didn't want to be the pink seat. Right? They looked at the board and they saw a bunch of, people that looked exactly the same. And they were like, I don't want to be the weird one, right? Like, that's a thing that people will feel and internalize. And so I think this is why it's really important to have these conversations, as uncomfortable as they might be, but we need to have them, because if we don't, then nothing's going to change, right? We have to have these things and start speaking out about why this is important. But if we try to make the humanitarian aspect the only argument, it's hard to get buy-in from businesses, because they're like, but we've got a bottom line, right? You want me to spend time, effort, energy, and money in this? What they don't realize is like, oh, but this can actually be a competitive advantage. This is actually something that's going to set me apart. I'm going to be able to attract and hire and retain better talent because of this. I'm going to be able to, have more diversity of thought and more innovation because of this. Right. And so that's where we have to start having the conversation of both, right? Let's see here. Belonging to nonprofit groups, they want to add, they are a diverse organization. Yeah, this is about having, being upfront about your diversity stance also. I was in a webinar many months ago where it was for the South County Chamber, I think. And a business owner said, hey, I really want to put out a diversity statement for my organization, but I'm worried that I'm going to alienate some of my customers. right? I mean, that, you put out a diversity statement and some of your customers look at that and go, I don't agree with that. I'm going to go shop elsewhere, right? That is a business decision that folks are making. But I think if you look at it from that aspect, like it might seem like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, you want to get as much money as you can from as much people. But what I asked the person to think about was, hey, do you want money from people that don't think that way? I mean, do you want to accept their patronage? Like, because now what you're talking about is you have to make it a value proposition for the individuals in the organization. Like, maybe I don't, like, if you don't believe in diversity and inclusivity the way that I do, maybe I don't want your money, right? Like, that's a decision. That's what, that's that value part of things. Like if it's infringing on your principles, if you're afraid of that, that can be problematic, and it's something to explore. And so I think it's important for organizations to realize that, yes, while you may, put out a diversity statement on your website, like that may alienate some customers, but what is that going to do for your recruits, right? If they've got 5 jobs lined up and they're doing their due diligence and they look and only one person has a diversity statement on their website, or an inclusion and diversity statement, probably going to be a place where they want to go and check out first, right? So I want to talk about like some of the ways that these distinctions show up, because somebody brought up age. And I find that I love to use the examples in the workplace of how different cultures show up and how these different labels and implications show up and how they become problematic, but we don't actually look at them as inclusion issues or a fact of difference in culture, right? And so if you've been in the workplace for a while and you hire somebody that's, let's say, under 30, okay? Or, maybe mid 30s, mid to under 30s, whatever, okay? They come in and they're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Maybe they're fresh out of college and they want to come in, and what's the first thing they want to do? Come on, I know you know. Come on, what is it?
Change things.
Yeah, they want to come in here and they want to upset the apple cart. They want to come in and change all this stuff. And you've been here for a while and you're like, hey, simmer down, pot roast. You'll have your chance. Like, you don't understand how all this work we've put in to build where we want. And what are they hearing? Shh. Know your role, right? Right, Charles? Like, I mean, so when we think about it, that's an inclusivity aspect, because here's the thing. Both parties are trying to do what they think is best. The person that's been there for a while is like, hey, you need to understand like how we got here. You don't know the burdens that I've had to go through to build this castle. And you want to come in here like you know a thing or two about a thing or two? No. Okay. You got to pay your dues. Meanwhile, that individual who's coming in is saying, I got these ideas. I learned some things. I want to come in. I want to make a change. I want to make an impact. And so all of a sudden it creates this tension point where all of a sudden you have all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people coming here trying to change everything. Oh no, but you got all these people that have been around for a while and all they want to do is gripe about, they don't want to change anything. Tension in the workplace. Okay. And no one's happy, but we don't look at that as inclusivity. We don't look at that as different cultures clashing. Okay. It's the same with the male and female genders brought up in very different cultures. Okay, that start from birth and carry on through their entire career. I mean, there is study after study about, when they used to wrap babies in pink and blue blankets, like the babies would get held differently, right? Like that's how far back those sorts of things start, right? Boys are taught to play in sports, and they play cowboys and Indians and us versus them sort of games, and they're raised in conflict and combat. Girls play dolls, and they play house in general. Okay, I'm speaking about the generalized, the middle of the bell curve here. Okay, so if you're like, I didn't play dolls, probably not. Okay, but just kind of generalizing here. There wasn't really like a winner of dolls. It was just kind of play through relationship. Those are just different cultures. But now when you have somebody who's used to conflict in the workplace and you have somebody who's used to relationship building, okay, tension in the workplace, right? I mean, think about it. You have all experienced this. You have a male leadership figure that comes in and is, really aggressive and in your face and assertive, not aggressive, assertive and in your face about things like, wow, leader. Okay. You have a female that comes in, is very strong and assertive. What do they say about her? They don't use the leader word.
Bitch.
What do they say?
She's
Yeah.
aggressive.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, nasty. I mean, Howard used the word that most people is true, right? There's those discrepancies and those things that are problematic because they're invisible to us. Like we don't look at it that way. Like we're just not taught, we're not groomed. That's not part of our kind of societal ethos, but it becomes problematic in the workplace. So I wanted to just illuminate that, that we draw distinctions about people in all of these things. And the fact that we label is not necessarily the problem. Okay, that is a very humanistic thing to do. We like to put things in buckets and label, okay? It's just how we process information. If somebody walks up to me on the street, they would say, okay, appears to be male, Caucasian, dresses like an age-inappropriate hipster. If I'm wearing my short sleeves, like has tattoos, and they're gonna think and feel a certain way. Like tattoos are a wonderful example of this. I wear long sleeve shirts when I'm dealing with clients and customers because I have tattoos that I love and I think are great. But I know that there are people in the world, maybe some people on this call that go, ooh, tattoos, maybe questionable decision making, maybe a little immature. I don't know. How's that going to work here? Okay. So like that's a learned behavior. And we actually all have these things that subconsciously we've developed over time, little pieces of ourselves that we have hidden away because we're worried about what's going to be accepted versus unaccepted in our workplaces. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of highlight that. I know we're bumping up against time, but the last thing that I'll lead you, and this is where this shows up in the workplace. Okay, and there are a couple of things that I want to highlight. One is the Pygmalion Effect. And what that is that basically our beliefs about a person's ability is going to impact their performance. And so I'm going to walk you through this model. I know you're not supposed to read slides, but I just find this really important, that our beliefs about others influence our actions towards others, which impacts their beliefs about themselves, which cause their others' actions towards us, who have the original belief, which ultimately reinforces our beliefs. Okay, and so this is by definition a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, if I come in and I'm running an organization, or let's flip it. Charles is running an organization and I come in with tattoos, and Charles doesn't like tattoos. Okay, Charles says, ooh, tattoos, questionable decision making, probably not very mature, not very professional is the term I use, or I hear a lot. Okay, which is going to influence his actions towards me. Okay, Charles is probably not going to put me in the face of the franchise. He's not going to give me a lot of leadership opportunities. He's not going to really put a whole lot of faith that I'm, really dedicated to the workplace, right? And all of a sudden, but he's going to do that to my peers, the people that are around me. And people are very observant in the workplace. And so I'm going to notice over time that Charles doesn't seem to give me a lot of, heavy responsibilities. He tends to ask me to go get, coffee and to like print things out for him. Okay. Which is going to cause me to be, maybe I'm not good. Maybe this is a me thing. Like, what am I doing wrong? Okay. And so I'm going to start getting down on myself and I'm not going to be performing really well. Okay. And that's going to reinforce. So when I show up to work, I'm late, not happy, not really asking for new opportunities. And Charles is going to go, see, I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have hired that guy. Okay. That's the Pygmalion effect, which is also that's actually the Gollum effect, because the Pygmalion effect says that if you think really well of others, right? Okay. It's going to have it's going to have what's called the halo effect, where people are actually going to perform better because you had higher expectations of them. Okay. And they're going to achieve those. Okay. So this is how this shows up in the workplace. And the thing that I want you to keep in mind as we go forward, right? This literally applies to any organization or workplace. Okay. This happened. This is life. Okay. This is families. This is neighborhoods. Like what we expect of people. There's the old adage is you spot it, you got it. Okay. If you expect this to happen, guess what's going to happen, whether it actually happened or not. Okay. So this is where the rubber meets the road when we talk about how this shows up in the workplace. Because we are all human, we are biased. We have biases, right? We hold certain stories and standards in our heads about how certain people who look or came from a different place or look a different way or are a different thing, or think about the Loden's model and explode it out. We all have those things that we hold in our hearts and in our heads, okay, that are not true. Okay, and that's what biases are. And what I would encourage you is, when you are wrestling with this in your workplaces, is that you want to treat any sort of bias as an opportunity to educate. Okay, because a person has been taught incorrectly, because biases are learned behavior. They are taught. They are not things that people are born with. It doesn't make them bad people. Okay, but I want to make sure that I pause here for a second, because I believe there is a difference between being ignorant and being willfully ignorant. Those are two different things that we're not going to talk about in here, but just understand that it's always, I say, look at those as opportunities to teach. But there are cases where that's not the case, right? There are people that are willfully believing things. So this is where as leaders in the organization, you have to understand that it's really important for you to understand what your biases are that you're bringing into the workplace, so that you can start to work on those to make sure you're not suppressing some internal genius that your folks would have. Because I fervently believe that every person on this planet has some genius inside of them, okay? LeBron James is a genius level basketball player and business person, right? Like, there are people that are talented in effectual ways, and it's only our belief or not in them that's going to really empower and affect and enable them, okay? And I just like this idea, like, you should never treat a person only as a pair of hands to get stuff done for you as a business owner. Okay, they are a whole person with a brain and with a heart, and all of those things lead to fantastic new innovations. They lead to great results that you couldn't have achieved on your own, because you didn't live like they lived. You didn't experience what they've experienced. And it doesn't matter what those experiences are. Most people are just looking for a venue for someone to listen to those ideas. And that's how we can really improve the workplace and really make inclusivity start to pay for itself, because it does take work. It does take effort. It does take self-reflection, and then getting others to reflect on themselves, and to build organizations where policies and procedures reflect the inclusive culture that you're trying to build. So hopefully, key takeaways: culture is important to your inclusivity. That labeling is not the problem, but it's when we stop at those labels and we hold people to those labels where it becomes problematic. And last, increase your diversity by focusing on inclusivity. Okay, use your level of diversity as a lagging indicator about the level of inclusivity you have in the workplace, because I promise you, people talk, and if you want to have an inclusive workplace, they will tell their friends. Like, you will get more diverse candidates if you work on building a spirit of inclusivity. Okay, so at this point, are there any questions, comments, concerns, hope, dreams, aspirations?
Hey, Wes, it's Charles. I just want to say thank you. You definitely hit on some points that I can reflect on. As you said, for your 2020, my 2020 was supposed to be an explosive year. Up until 2019 or whatnot, it was definitely on a really great trajectory. And 2020 came around, and boy, oh boy, all kinds of things just fell to the ground. But, I'm picking up the pieces again, reflecting, learning, and definitely trying to build better relationships in a variety of areas, so that, yeah, I can be more successful in leading my branch team here at the office, and leading my family, as a dad, man. So, setting those
Love that.
expectations and making sure I'm open to hearing and listening and not just saying my way or the highway. I appreciate this information. Thank you.
And I'm having trouble just holding up a hand, but I have to say that everything you said applies to every organization and workplace. So I thank you very much. It's been very learning. So yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll put my email in the chat. Feel free, any of you, to reach out. Like if you have questions, I'm happy to be a resource. Like this is something that I'm really passionate about. And so if you need someone to just bounce ideas off of or ask questions about, I'm happy to be a resource there for you. So go ahead, Victoria.
Hey, so I guess this could be a whole nother presentation in itself, but wondering if there's some links you can share, a little tidbit of how you would go about as a workforce member or leader or both in evaluating whether or not you have an inclusive workplace. I mean, where would you even start other than asking them and hoping to get some qualitative data,
Yeah. So here's just a couple of things that I will say. There's lots of resources out there. Some of them are great. Others are just kind of good. It seems like a gross oversimplification to say like, just ask people, but if you have their trust, they'll tell you. And talking to them about their experiences. So when I started to get a real passion for this idea of inclusion and diversity, because admittedly, many years ago, it was not something that really hit my radar. Like privilege, So the thing that really struck me is I was taking a class for diversity and inclusion as part of my undergrad. And the final assignment was that I needed to go and do an interview with somebody who was different than me. Okay. And so the parameters were needs to be 12 pages long and they have to be different than me. That was it. Okay. But 12 pages, I don't know when the last time you wrote a paper, but 12 pages, that's a lot. That's a lot of writing. This is not just telling me about your mom and your dad and your brothers and sisters, right? So I found an engineer that I had worked with for 3 years. Okay, we had had lunch together. Like it was something like he and I thought had a relationship, a work relationship as deep as I let those go. And I will tell you what, I walked away and I was just like, wow, this is crazy. Like I would have known none of this. And so it really, like, to me, inclusivity starts with getting to know people first. Okay, and understanding their story and why they show up the way that they do and how that impacts, because the thing is, we are kind of the workmanship of our experience. And so really I'll end it with this. Taking time to get to know people and building a safe space where you can have some of these uncomfortable conversations is going to go a long way, okay, to getting them to start to unearth some of these things. But for organizations that are like, but I want a survey, or, how do I quantify this? I have always said surveys are great, but if you're an organization that feels like you need a survey for diversity or for engagement or for employee satisfaction, you probably somewhere in the back of your head know maybe there's an opportunity to improve here and I'm just looking for a number to kind of put around it. If you have that, there are plenty of surveys that are out there that I'm sure will be great. But if you have that inkling, maybe start with the conversations first, because at the end of the day, that might be cheaper. And you're going to get more, while it is anecdotal data, it's the anecdotal data of the people who are working in your organization. So it actually carries a lot of weight. Nice. Yeah. Some of a couple quick things you can do if you want to start to build this is build space in a meeting or two where you just have someone share something about themselves. Okay. It can be like for a new leadership group that put together, we had an about me section where folks would get together and every week they would just put together a presentation that said, hey, and the only parameters were, you got to talk to us about who you are outside of work. Like, don't tell me about your job. Don't, you know what I mean? Like, we know what you do for a living. Talk about, and it's interesting to see, because what happens is you start to develop connections, right? You start to develop those connections of like interests, right? Which then breeds into relationships where people can actually start to feel comfortable about having these conversations. So it can be just a simple, like, if you're in a stand-up or a huddle or something, just, hey, Howard, tell me something about you that we don't know. And let people be comfortably vulnerable. You know, maybe Howard's like, I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And that's the level of comfortability that Howard has in the workplace. And that's okay, right? But just giving space for folks to get to know each other in the organization can go a long, long way. Cool. All right.
Well, thanks a lot,
And-
Wes, for your time.